Hello, this is Kathleen Wilcox. I'm here with Peter Bell. We're about to taste 3 of his wonderful wines, and he's going to walk us through these estate-grown wines from Fox Run. So take it away, Peter.
Hi, Kathleen. Thanks very much, and it's great to meet you for the first time.
Great to meet you.
You asked me, on Deborah's behalf, I assume, to submit 3 wines, and it took me a few days to figure out which ones to send you for us to taste, because we have about 25 different wines, 20 to 25. It's too many, but they're all very exciting to me because I made them along with my assistant, and they all have a backstory, and they are my children. So picking your 3 today is sort of like picking your best few children if you have a lot of them, and that's always hard. But I did it. And I'm really mixing it up. You're going to be kind of surprised by at least one of these wines. So that's on purpose. I like a little bit of shock value. But we have, let's start with this wine.
Perfect.
You have a glass, there it is. Sylvan Riesling 2018, bottled about a year ago. And there's a little backstory here. Riesling is not in terms of production, but certainly our most famous illustrious grape in the Finger Lakes, and it always will be. It's got world recognition. And when people mention, the best 5 places in the world to grow Riesling, the Finger Lakes is almost always on that list. So I make maybe 4 or 5 or 6 different Rieslings at any time. The obvious way to manipulate the style, of course, is with residual sugar. And, drier wines are a little more exciting to wine lovers. Sweeter wines may be more appealing to the general public. So that's fun to work with. And we have different sites. If every site is, there's 7 or 8 different plantings of Riesling on our property, and they all behave somewhat differently. We get different flavors from different, what we call blocks. And those are all kept separate, fermented and vinified separately until the final blending takes place. Now, back to this wine. It's got an unusual little name, Sylvan. It's a sort of a made-up name, but it's a very, very oblique reference to a wooded area. So you know the word, you've heard of Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Have you heard of Transylvania?
Yes.
So Transylvania means literally beyond the wooded region.
Oh,
so Sylvan is the root word, and it refers to forests. Now, this is not made with forests, but I use oak barrels to make this. So this really, it takes a little bit of a story to tell before I, what Sylvan means. So unusually enough, this wine is fermented in oak barrels, something we do customarily with Chardonnay, not very often with anything else. And at one point, 7 or 8 years ago, we said, how can we come up with a product which is a little different from the mainstream kind of dry, tense, juicy, fruit-driven Riesling that everybody loves so much, but it was a kind of a crowded field. So Scott and I got together and said, well, why don't we try making a small amount of barrel fermented wine? Now, I had seen some examples of wines made in that style in the Finger Lakes and didn't like them particularly. They were overtly oaky. And the last thing you want to do is stick your nose in a glass of any wine and smell barrels these days, let alone, least of all Riesling. So I tweaked this a little bit, and it is 100% barrel fermented, but it's in and out of oak in about 3 weeks' time. So no barrel aging at all, just long enough to ferment almost to dryness.
It's delicious.
I don't know, you tell me what you think.
I love it. And I don't taste the oak, but I can see what you're saying with the influence.
Yeah. So there's the influence of the oak really, if you were to compare it to our standard dry Riesling, is all about texture or mouthfeel. This one's a little creamier and thicker. There's no lees contact, no malolactic, but the act of fermenting it, even in an old barrel, adds this kind of richness that almost masquerades as sweetness to some people. Sometimes when this wine gets reviewed, it gets a lot of very good reviews. People say, that there's a bit of obvious sweetness in this wine. And I can see where they're coming from because they're tasting it blind. It's actually almost bone dry. But that texture, that silky, rich texture, normally people associate that with sugar.
Absolutely. It's really. And when you mention your tasting notes, what are you picking up here?
Oh boy, tasting notes are tricky. They're so personal and everything. So I do. It's obviously Riesling, and you can use general citrus and floral descriptors to describe Riesling. I do get some sort of exotic kind of Meyer lemon or preserved lemon flavors, lemon curd flavors in here, all of which I love a lot. And there's a little bit of vague spiciness, a little bit of herbal kind of tarragon vibe going on.
I'm definitely getting the Meyer lemon and
Yeah.
and the spice, which I love. I love a little spice.
Yeah. And then, all good cool climate Rieslings are driven by obvious acid.
Yes.
And, if this wine was lower in acid, not that it ever would be, but it wouldn't be Riesling anymore. It wouldn't be refreshing. As opposed to a softer, say, Pinot Grigio or lower acid Chardonnay or something, doesn't have that kind of salivation effect that Riesling will. Absolutely. And we want that. We want the last flavors after you swallow it to be driven by a residual kind of acidic aftertaste.
Absolutely.
So this one's got it for sure.
I love it. And I don't know if this is the one that you thought was going to surprise me, but I was a little surprised to get the Cabernet. Was that the one that you thought would be?
Yeah, and then the fortified wine.
Yeah, but I mean, I love a good port, and I love obviously a good cab. So whichever one you want to talk about first,
Okay. Let's go to the red.
Okay.
I happen to have a bottle right here. I opened it last night, so I don't even have to waste my time pulling a cork. So 2018 Cabernet Sauvignon. I believe this is 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm a tinkerer in the winery. I always have been, and that doesn't mean I overly manipulate wines or anything. But I love getting barrels emptied of a wine like this, and then seeing what a little few percent of Cabernet Franc or Merlot will do to the wine. And most of the time, I find the wine is improved by a splash of one of those two grapes, kind of like an emeritage style. Sure. They all have their own personalities. But as it turns out, Kathleen, this year, the wine was 100% Cabernet Sauvignon and wanted to be defiantly Cabernet Sauvignon.
I love it.
So here it is. It was bottled a couple of months ago, so still a young baby. It had a full year in oak, but again, older oak. Nobody wants to smell oak these days. And, it's a cool climate red. Let's get that straight. It's not jammy. It's not kind of mouth coating. It's not supposed to be. The acid's there to help with food, etc. Alcohol's in the normal range, a little under 13%. Tannins are moderate. Let me taste it again.
I love the lower alcohol cabs, especially. I think they're first of all, you can have a few glasses without, feeling like you're.
I know. I don't want to beat up on those styles because it's impolite of me.
I know.
It's really hard to go to 15 or 16% red. And,
right.
Having said that, we're about to taste something with 20% in it. So I'm not beating up on alcohol.
Right. But I mean, exactly. But when you think of a port, you think of a smaller amount. You don't think of, two big glasses. But anyway. Yeah. But so I love, this is a really restrained, and I mean that in a good way, a restrained cab. And I've had it open just because I like to keep wine open for a little while, and it's really opening up. It's got a beautiful bouquet. So again,
yes.
I put you on the spot, but what are your tasting notes for this?
Same thing. Thank you. Before I talk about the wine, thank you for that comment about opening wine in advance and keeping them open for a while. Reds like this, no matter how old or young they are, often have a kind of it's not bottle shock, but they're not very open when you first pour them. And they really blossom. You see layers of fruit coming out after a couple hours or even a night. This was a half bottle and it was in the fridge all night, and it's actually a lot better right now than it was last night. So thank you for that. It applies to whites as well. Whites can open up big time.
That's right.
So how would I describe this? I don't fall into the cassis black currant kind of trap a little bit. I don't see that in this wine very much. Cabernet Sauvignon always has a slight green, appealing green herbaceous element. That's there in all Cabernets, if they're any good around the world. So I see a little bit of that. Other than that, general berries, dark berries, blackberries, a little bit of a jammy thing, I guess. And then, a moderate frame. It's not super rich. It's not thin. I really want to make sure the tannins are dialed in perfectly, and that comes down to, specific winemaking practices. So I want there to be some tannins there, but not, so much that they close the wine down. And, wine like this, we have yet to find a bottle, if it's, as long as it's under a good cork, we have yet to find a bottle that's, excessively aged. These wines have an amazing staying power, probably because of the slightly higher acid and the moderate alcohol. They're beautiful after 7 or 8 years in the bottle.
Oh, great. Okay, good to know.
I'm married to someone who drinks red wine probably 5 nights out of 7 by choice, and so we don't get a chance to age them that long. They kind of disappear. But when I hide a bottle, it's really good when it's 5 or 6 years old.
That's great. That's great to know.
So we also make a varietal Merlot.
Okay.
It's a tough grape to grow here because it ripens fine, but it hates a little hint of cold weather in the wintertime. The vines just die. So we're letting those vines kind of, we're losing them by attrition. Cabernet Franc is, on the other hand, much more robust. Doesn't mind cold weather at all, and is a fairly heavy cropper in the summertime, vigorous vines. And as long as you do some really good canopy management, you can make these very perfumey raspberry leaf aroma-driven wines that are really fun. And that's a far more important red grape here than Cabernet Sauvignon ever will be.
Yes, and I think that Cabernet, this is kind of off topic, but I think that Cab Franc is having a comeback, especially on the East Coast. It's really doing wonderful things. Yeah,
nobody decided in advance that this was our great grape. We just put a bunch of different grapes in the ground 20, 30 years ago and just sat back and watched how they performed. And Cabernet Franc and another grape called Lemberger or Blaufränkisch rose to the top. Who would have thought? We would never have decided that in advance. Long Island decided in advance that Merlot was their great grape. We just had no preconceived ideas, and it was a meritocracy. So we let the grapes do their thing, and Cab Franc and Lemberger turned out to be the greatest ones.
That's great.
So I'm sorry I didn't send you one, but
no, I have to come up and visit when coronavirus is dissipated somewhat or some more. And I'd love to hear about this port. I'm really excited to try this one.
Yeah. So I better open it. First of all, a little apology for using that word port. We are committed to the idea of not stealing European place names.
Right, of course.
Which is, of course, everybody's on board with that. We are legally allowed to use the word port. We're grandfathered in because it's been going on for so long. And we're actively looking for an alternative nomenclature with this wine.
I see tonic.
It's harder than you think. You can't say, you're not allowed to say fortified wine. Fortified wine is, the word fortified is currently prohibited. So there's no easy out. It's easy to stop using the word champagne or méthode champenoise, but fortified wines, you get into some really tricky territory. So I apologize to people who are offended by the name port, and that's going to change eventually.
Well, you have fine old Tawny, and I think Tawny is a wonderful name for.
Yeah, I agree. That I came up with that years and years ago, and it's neutral, kind of geographically neutral, and the port's in a very small font, etc. So the story on this one is, it all starts in 1986 when I moved to Australia to study winemaking, to get my Bachelor of Science in Wine Science. And I happened to move to an area called the Riverina region of New South Wales. which is close to Rutherglen. And if you're a student of fortified wines, you will have heard of Rutherglen. Very famous region for fortified wines. I had no knowledge about those things at all until I was immersed fairly robustly for 4 years in fortified wines. Love making them, love tasting them. You know, they're very cerebral wines to make and to drink and to talk about. When I came to the Finger Lakes in 1990, I was pretty much 100% convinced that I would never have anything to do with fortified wines again in my life, because this is, you know, not fortified wine country. Even though, you know, in the old pre-1960s, there were fake sherries and things like that made, and that's what people drank around here. But I'm talking about modern world-class styles. That all changed when I came to Fox Run, and Scott said, I hear you're pretty good at fortified wines. Why don't you try making a ruby style port? And I did, make one out of some Cabernet Sauvignon, 1 barrel's worth. And that sold out very quickly, and made 2 barrels the next year. And now we're up to like 15 of them, 15 barrels a year.
Wow.
12 to 15. So it's a bit of a cult wine. This is one of, and then this one grew out of the ruby style. Ruby style is an early bottled kind of jam pie flavored, you know, driven wine. This
And
one
are they
obviously
all,
not.
are they all, oh, what were you saying about the grape for this one?
This varies. This is mostly, no, let's see, this is a blend of Cabernet Franc, Lemberger, and Cabernet Sauvignon.
Got
You
it.
wouldn't know by smelling it. So
No.
this wine is, it's a non-vintage wine, but this is actually 7, 8 years old before it goes in the bottle.
Wow.
And it's been sitting in barrels in a very warm environment. So you see the brown color. That's, you know, that's what Tawny's all about.
It's beautiful.
Purple. It used to be a very vibrant purple wine, and as a consequence of my deliberate slow oxidation of the wine. Oxidation is something you want to avoid in most cases, but in this case, we're really pushing that oxidation thing. And the kind of jam and pie flavors have given over to these brown related flavors like coffee and toffee and butterscotch and raisins. No matter, you can go on and on and on and on with brown related things.
Beautiful.
So I'm making wine in this style in this program right now that won't be bottled until I'm in my 70s. So this is how long it takes. It takes a long time to make this stuff. And I'm happy to do that. It'll be someone else's project in the coming years. But you do make something, you know, now that is going to not be ready for almost a decade. And
yeah,
that's a fascinating kind of thing to do.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think it is a very cerebral wine to drink as well. And it really does invite serious thought and consideration and conversation, which is what slow wine is all about. So on that note, I will say thank you very much, and I will talk to you soon.
Well, thanks, Kathleen.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Okay.
I'll
Look forward to hearing from you.